I get attacked by that thing. Okay. So in following Srila Prabhupada's beautiful tradition, chanting Jai Radha Madhava.
There's some music on that. Oh, from the kitchen, okay.
Gorgeous darshan. For those of you who are around the corner, come a little bit, because there's a huge space here. And, you know, if you have to sit in a chair, I understand. But try to get a chair that you can see Radha Natabar, because they're just stunning. Hare Krishna. Ranchor. You know that there's a book written by a wonderful disciple of Srila Prabhupada, Ranchor. He's very, you know who he is? He's very active in ecological situations, you know, connecting them with Krishna consciousness, the Vedas. And then he wrote that book, The Sun Also Rises. And it's an excellent book about the British Yatra. Jaya Radha Madhava Radhi Hare Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. His divine grace, Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. ISKCON BBT founder Acharya's divine grace, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava ki jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Yugadharma ki jai. December book marathon distribution ki jai. Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol. All glories, all glories, all glories to the assembled devotees. All glories, all glories, all glories to the lotus feet of Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. So, yeah. Does somebody have a tissue that I could have? Or, Kleenex, whatever. I don't know, I said some topic, so I can't remember exactly what I said, how I, not that much, I just need one little tissue. This is when I eat, I need all of that. So, I was thinking along the lines how an enlightened soul affects the life of every person they meet. But we don't meet that many enlightened souls. And then there's questions of degree of enlightenment, like we have this switch over there on the wall, and you can make the lights brighter and then dim it down a bit so the light's still on, but different degrees. So there's also different degrees of enlightenment. Hanging around the Hare Krishnas, you're going to hear the term pure devotees. Different degrees of pure devotees, so it can get a little interesting. Anybody here first time, by the way? Okay, so a quick example. You've got a kid, like we have our little nursery school, not a nursery school, Sunday school, but there's also a nursery school, there's preschool, and the kids go to kindergarten, the grade school, middle grade, high school. I guess it's like that nowadays. You get to college, then you may go into another further college, and then you get up to your PhD. And all along the way, whether you're that little kid in the preschool up to the PhD, you're a student. But you cannot equate all the students. I mean, potential is there down at the bottom, but not everybody on the equal level of being a student. So it's kind of like that, the pure devotee. And then you have those extraordinary souls, we can say they're off the charts. They have no dimness. They're beyond, even when we crank the lights up here, there's a point where that's as high as it's going to go. So the pure devotee is beyond that. Srila Prabhupada was such a soul. And as such, he himself described himself in 1967, 66, 65 when he first got here. Okay, so Butler, Pennsylvania, this exquisite little town that was like losing its mojo. It was just like massively decline. And here comes a Swami from India in 1965, and so the host was a mixed couple. Not mixed up, mixed. She was American, Sally, and her husband, Gopal, was from India. And Sally had the foresight to think, it might look a little strange to people to see this. Even she was surprised when she first saw Srila Prabhupada, in his orange robes and his little plastic, she had these little plastic shoes, pointy-toed shoes. There's even a song describing that. He walked the New York City streets. His head was held up high. His cane was tapping the sidewalk, and his pointy-toed plastic shoes were gliding by, something like that, It was a sight to behold. So she's thinking in this particular little town that was not at all cosmopolitan, how would they relate? What would they relate? What would they think? So she thought it was a good idea to have a newspaper article, something out in the press, And so they wrote, actually, it was quite an interestingly nice, there was nothing you could write that was negative yet about the ISKCON because it didn't exist, And they wrote about Srila Prabhupada using his own description of himself. He was an ambassador of Bhakti Yoga to the West. So that was 65. And that would be in October, sometime at the end of September, because he landed in September. He left, that would be in October, because he left in, his arrival was actually, like, now they have this whole calendar thing that gets flipped you out. It's like we live in the West, but they use this, like, quote unquote, Vedic calendar, sooner, lunar, the moon, soon the sun, the moon, okay, fine. But, over here, it's like somebody asks you what the date is, here's the date. But if you come to get things a little scrambled, get an ISKCON calendar, and it'll look the same until you start reading some of the information, like the arrival day of Srila Prabhupada, for example, or the departure day. So in the Western world, there's only one holiday that is depending on it changes. And anybody know what that is?
Easter.
Exactly. Otherwise, Christmas is always on a certain day, things are a certain day. So Prabhupada arrived on this certain day, September 17th, 65. And it had been, like over 36 days on a boat, a ship, a very crummy little tiny cargo ship to get over here. And he almost didn't make it over here because, if anybody's familiar, you understood he had heart attacks twice on that boat, and there was no medical center on the boat. There was no doctor on the boat. But Krishna was there with Prabhupada in his heart, and Krishna assured him he would get him across safely. So then, about 57 years ago, on a cold December night in New York City, so eventually Prabhupada did arrive to New York City. It was clear that Butler, Pennsylvania was not a place to start an international movement. So this cold night in December, New York City. Now it's later, over a year later, it's 1966. So this elderly Indian Swami climbed into a Volkswagen van. So during that era, everybody wanted, not everybody, but everybody in the world of seekers, the alternative side of society, who was sometimes called, quite often actually, usually called hippies. They were seekers looking for something more out of life than 9 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 5, On one hand, you could say, yeah, we wanted to party 24/7, but it wasn't really just about a party. It was about finding out who we were, what we're supposed to be doing here, where did we belong, and most of all, what was the meaning of life? And Prabhupada arrived at a time when there was an increased fevered pitch of dissatisfaction which I think we're really heading into now because the news is so horrific nowadays, and there's just never a moment of relief. Just when you think, oh my God, it can't get any worse than that, so the next day shows up and there's another headline worse than that. You know, but instead of trying to find material solutions, or at least what they thought, because people weren't super clear on what was matter, what was spirit, or any of that. But okay, I'm sorry. That's in my bag, and it's Gayatri time. You can just hit the stop. It's the alarm. Okay, so my apologies. So he had a few, you could say a few followers by this point. So December 66, this was right before the historic event. One part of the historic event was that he got on a plane on January 17th, so about a month after this event, which I'm going to mention here, flew to San Francisco, California. And that's where I kicked in. But on this particular cold December night in 66, he climbs into a Volkswagen van. And as I said, the Volkswagen vans were favored of the hippie seekers. It was a kind of a symbol of, we're not under your thumb, and we're not going to be under your thumb. And, you know, some freedom to go where you want, the way you wanted to go. But the problem was we didn't know where we wanted to go or how to get there. And definitely, ultimately, it was not going to be in a Volkswagen van, but still it was a spirit of the era. If you kind of Google Volkswagen vans in the 60s, you'll see what I mean, because they were really colorful. You know, they were painted all kinds of colorful ways. He gets into one with about 15 followers. And Volkswagen vans are really not much more bigger than a large modern day SUV. So, you know, and these weren't even Indians except for Prabhupada at that point, by his own admission, said, I'm practically speaking, I'm the only Indian in the Hare Krishna movement, you know, at that point. So 15 Americans squeeze in this van, along with instruments, including a harmonium that was loaned by a friend named Alan Ginsberg. And they drove uptown. So this was downtown, Lower East Side, Manhattan. And they drove to a recording studio near Times Square. Y'all know Times Square, that's where the big ball comes crashing down on New Year's Eve. And now there's riots and killings, and, you know, it's a great place. There weren't nobody was a professional musician. But it was a lot of enthusiasm. And in a few hours, they had recorded what we called long play. It means a large vinyl record. And even the producer was excited. There was something happening here. And in fact, the name of the label was Happening. It was Happening label. So it was a special album, more than just music. It was chanting and meditation. It was worship. And a few months later, a letter arrived at the small storefront temple in New York's Lower East Side. It's 26 2nd Avenue. I don't know how many people have been there. A number of you. You know, it's a place to go, really. And somebody had heard about the album. They told the Beatles about it. In that letter, they were ordering 100 copies of this Happening label, of this Happening album, where Prabhupada is chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra with his followers. And then he gives a little dissertation on the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So the Beatles ordered 100 copies of that. So there was a conversation around 83 or so with Mukunda Goswami, who was one of the 6 of us who went to the UK. And he was speaking with George, so George told Mukunda some of his striking experiences he had while chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, and shared some of his realizations about the chanting and the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. And he told how he felt about having helped the devotees expand the movement in England. And he talked about how he relished prasadam. And most strikingly, he told how deeply he appreciated the founder of the movement, His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. So he recalled his impression of Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's Krishna Consciousness, the album, what the impression was on them. So he was saying, I remember singing it, the Hare Krishna mantra, just for days. John and I, with ukulele, we got a ukulele person here, ukulele banjos, sailing through the Greek islands. Hare Krishna, like 6 hours we sang because we couldn't stop singing once we started. You just couldn't stop. It was like as soon as you stopped, the lights went out. So we just kept chanting the mantra. So that was George sharing his experience. And then in September of 1969, so we got over to the UK in 68, met George. So in 69, September, Prabhupada arrived at a house. It was a guest house in a beautiful 80-acre British estate known as Tittenhurst Park. And it was owned by John Lennon, and we were his guests living there. There was the former, stables that had been converted into smaller, like, living quarters. So 3 or 4 times a week, Prabhupada would, at that point, he was Swami. During that time, it changed over. Then he became known as Srila Prabhupada. So he was sometimes Swami to Prabhupada. He kind of crossed over around that time. It's another whole story, but anyways, there was a building there. It was a very stately building at the northern end of the property, about a few hundred yards from the main house where John and Yoko lived. So we kind of asked, can we use that place? It was beautiful inside, and it was agreed. And formerly had been used as a hall for chamber music recitals. So that's kind of like, anybody here have any idea what chamber music is? Oh, well, okay, you know. Explain to us.
Yeah, it's just a small number of instruments, like maybe, so I was a pianist, and there would always be like a violin and maybe a clarinet, so like 3 or 4 playing classical music.
Okay, so, not hip-hop, not rock and roll, not bluegrass or country. It's like kind of sedate music, right? Yes. Tea music, you'd have it as. Anyways, so that's what that building had been used for. But now we'd installed a small deity altar on a podium. There was a podium off, for Srila Prabhupada. And up until that point, there was not really a name for the building. But after Prabhupada's arrival, everyone, including the owners, started just calling it the temple. I didn't have time to put a slideshow together. I'm just not really good at that. But there's several pictures of us in there. Many things happened. There was the first initiation in the UK was there. The first marriage in the UK was there. So in June, so this was September, we're there, but in June, Prabhupada had written a letter to Shyam Sundar, and he said, I'm very glad to know that George is interested in recording some Krishna conscious album. It's very happy news. I request you, and through you, your friends, George and John, to make a nice Hare Krishna song sung by the most popular Beatles, assisted by our devotees. That will be very nice. And I have all encouragement to you for this purpose. Try to make the Hare Krishna movement popular through any source that's possible. That's our business. So Prabhupada was not looking like for a particular paradigm, a particular law. He was looking to expand Krishna consciousness, to make Krishna consciousness available on a broad sector of the public in a unrestricted way. So, and this is one, the first from the Bhagavatam, the word pramada mentioned refers to material intelligence or ignorance, and is to be understood as such. When one takes shelter of this kind of intelligence, he identifies himself with the material body, influenced by the consciousness of I and mine. And he begins to enjoy and suffer through his senses. And thus the living entity is trapped. And then Prabhupada explains in the purport, in material existence, the living entity falsely claims things to be his. He thinks, I am the monarch of all I survey. This is ignorance. And actually nothing belongs to him. And even the body and the senses don't belong to him. They're given to him by the grace of the Lord to use for different propensities through the material energy. Nothing actually belongs to the living entity because he becomes mad after everything, claiming, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. This is called illusion. Nothing belongs to the living entity, but he claims everything belongs to him. So one takes shelter of this kind of intelligence and identifies himself with the material body, influenced by the material consciousness of I and mine. He begins to suffer and enjoy. So this is called illusion. Nothing belongs to the living entity, but he's claiming it belongs to me. So this became reflected in the last song ever recorded by the Beatles. As you all know, they all kind of, or you may not know, they broke up. So this I Me Mine was like going around George's head, you know. So he wrote this song called I Me Mine. A couple of the lyrics, all through the day. You know this song, some of you who Beatle people? You know? All through the day, I me mine, I me mine, I me mine. All through the night, I me mine, I me mine, I me mine. Now they're frightened of leaving it. Everyone's leaving it, coming on strong all the time, all through the day. I me mine, I me mine. So he ends, there's many lyrics, but he ends with a salute to the way out by chanting Hare Krishna. You know? So Prabhupada commented, you know, I think George does not require to become my formal disciple because he's already more than my disciple. He has a sympathy for my movement, and I have all blessings for him. Sometimes people, did George get initiated? Why didn't he get initiated? You know, here's your answer from Prabhupada. But, you know, George was inquisitive. He would ask questions and Prabhupada would answer. So one letter in 70, regarding how George may continue his meditation, that meditation may be done, and this is something we can all think, you know, hear and show others, tell others. That meditation may be done by keeping one picture of Krishna and keeping one's mind concentrated on the picture of Krishna and softly chanting Hare Krishna Maha Mantra as long as they like. You know. And that will complete both his meditation and Krishna consciousness perfectly according to the last verse of the 6th chapter of the Gita, which says, and of all the yogis, he who always abides in me with great faith, worshiping me in transcendental loving service, is most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. So Prabhupada was so broad-minded. He was so inclusive. You know, he was beyond the high level of the, it's because we have the modes of material nature, and the highest level in the material nature is goodness. But an enlightened soul is above even goodness. It's called Suddha higher than even goodness. So Prabhupada was explaining, given when he first walked into Bhaktivedanta Manor, which was a magnificent donation from George Harrison. He walks in, and anybody here familiar with at least Bhaktivedanta, by the name Bhaktivedanta Manor, you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just briefly, we had a small place in central London that it was like 1 block from the British Library. Very good address. Walk right out there, you'd be in, just walk out in the street and just perform Sri Harinam Sankirtan, which we would do for hours daily. But we outgrew the place. And one day George was looking around and he says, I think we need a larger place. And he told one particular devotee I didn't know what was going on behind me, to look around for a place. And this was what we got. And Sriman George Harrison donated it. So Prabhupada said, given the facility assembling in this nice house, this good boy, George Harrison, we must give him all glories. We must be thankful to him that he has given us this facility. And Krishna will bless him more and more. So I'm always struck, a lot of times people like to talk about gratitude. It's a big buzzword, gratitude, But what are we grateful for, and how are we showing our gratitude? That's what's important in the word. And Prabhupada was showing his gratitude to George Harrison and exhorting we must give him all glories. That we also had to be, not just take it for granted that, just because he could do it, he should have done it anyway. No, he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to do any of it. But by the influence of an enlightened soul, Srila Prabhupada, the Lord in his heart was prompting him and guiding him. So Prabhupada commented, our position is that we're in the material world. George has sung that. I'm living in the material world. Yes, a very sensible song. And he laughed. A very sensible song. He's a good boy, realizing. So this material life isn't good. Material life is not good in this sense because you have to change your body. Sometimes good birth, sometimes not a good birth, sometimes Englishman, sometimes cat and dog. Possibility is there. Because after death, you'll get a body, and it will be chosen not by us, not by you, but by material nature. You'll create your body. So all of us right now, we're creating our next body. You have these bodybuilders, you have these gyms, La Fitness and whatever, Everybody goes in there to change their body. But actually that's going to happen by the grace of material nature and by the activities we perform now and the consciousness with which we're performing them. There was one professor who came to Srila Prabhupada, and most of the time when these people would come to visit, they were either academics, sometimes they were sports stars, but they had some interest, So this David Lawrence was a professor, and he had more than an average interest. And so he was telling about one time he left his office, he came through the library, and he had this, what he felt was a tremendous, experience, because there was one boy, you could check out records in the library and listen to them. And in this one place. So this boy, he found a boy, and he was listening to George Harrison's recording that had been made. And he was telling Devotee, you can tell this to George if you like. So he was listening to the record quietly. There was a music room. And there was a lot of stuff going on outside with big speakers, but this boy was just there. His head was down and he was intensely listening, and the words were there, so he was reading. And Prabhupada said, in the material world, that's what he was listening to. And David, the professor, said, yes, living in the material world. Prabhupada said, that is a very nice song. So the professor goes, and he sat there and he was praying. So I didn't interfere. He came out of the room afterwards. He turned the record player off. So the professor asked him, well, what were you doing there? And he said, this record has been a complete experience for me. So this is what a person who becomes empowered or infected, you can say, by the association of a pure devotee. That not only does their life transform, but they have the ability to transform the lives of others. And it's undeniable that George Harrison gave a boost to the Hare Krishna movement that few others could possibly imagine. So David Lawrence, he said, it was tremendous, really tremendous to see this, Just before Prabhupada left the world in 1977, which was November, he took a ring. So there was a leela of giving Prabhupada rings. It wasn't like Prabhupada was trying to punk out and wear fancy. People would give him rings. It was like, you meet somebody and you feel this person is so special. They just gave me something. I want to give them something, but you're standing there with nothing, and maybe you have a ring on. They would give it to him, and to oblige them, he would find a finger. The ring would fit. So he had this one ring on. He took it off. This is right before departing in 77, and he gave it to one of his attending disciples. He goes, "This is for George. Give it to him." Didn't have to say Harrison. It was understood. So Mukunda asked George, from the very start, were you always comfortable around the devotees? Because sometimes it can be kind of just like we can get around certain people sometimes, and it's not always a comfortable fit right away, So he asked George, were you always comfortable? Do you always feel comfortable around the devotees? And George said, the first time I met Shyam Sundar, I liked him. He was my pal. It was like this instant bond. I knew that Shyam Sundar and all of you were in my age group. The only difference really was you'd already joined and I hadn't. I was in a rock and roll band, but I didn't have any fear because I had seen dhotis and saffron colors and shaved heads in India, because he had gone to India with the other Beatles to meet the Maharishi. So I didn't have any fear, because sometimes people, they'd be afraid when they'd see us on the street. They'd even cross to the other side, So I said, I didn't have any fear. The Krishna consciousness was especially good for me because I didn't get the feeling that I'd have to shave my head and move into a temple and do it full time. So it was a spiritual thing that just fit in with my lifestyle. I could still be a musician, but I had to change my consciousness. That's all. So he got it, And then he commented that actually it gave me pleasure, the idea that I was fortunate enough to be able to help at that time. All these songs with spiritual themes were like little plugs, he could toss out there. My Sweet Lord, I think everybody in this room knows My Sweet Lord, yes, and the others. And now I know that people have much more respectful, and they're more respectful and accepting when it comes to seeing devotees in the street and all that. It's not anymore like something coming from left field. So this is like an 80. So I've given a lot of Prabhupada's books to many people, and whether I hear from them again or not, it's just good to know that they've gotten these books. And if they read,
this is George saying?
This is George.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's giving them out. I mean, he also gave out Maharishi's books, but we give Prabhupada's books out. And if they read them, their life may be changed. So he had that understanding. So Mukunda commented, well, Srila Prabhupada always trained us to stick to our principles. That means don't compromise. Please keep this in mind. He said the worst thing we could ever do is make some sort of compromise or dilute the philosophy for the sake of cheap popularity. Although many swamis and yogis had come, this is Mukunda, from India to the West, Prabhupada was the only one with purity and devotion to establish India's ancient Krishna conscious philosophy around the world on its own terms, not watered down, but as it is. That should be our mantra. Everybody repeat, as it is, Jai. So George responded to this, yes, that's right. He was a perfect example of what he preached. And then Mukunda asked, because I think you all know that George paid for the first printing of the Krishna book. So Mukunda asked him, how'd you feel about financing that first printing of the Krishna book and writing the introduction? And George said, I just felt like it was part of my job, you know. Wherever I go in the world, when I see devotees, I always say Hare Krishna to them. And they're always pleased to see me. It's a nice relationship, whether they know me personally or not. They feel like they know me, and they do really, you know. So then Mukunda brings up the prasadam. At lunch today, we spoke a little about prasadam, vegetarian food that's been spiritualized by being offered to Krishna in the temple. And it's true, a lot of people come to Krishna consciousness through prasadam, you know, especially Sunday feast program, you know, all around the world. I mean, this process is the only kind of yoga you can actually practice yoga by eating. Of course, Prabhupada said, we don't eat prasadam, we honor prasadam, you know. So George responded, well, we should try to see God in everything, so it helps so much having the food to taste. Let's face it, God is in everything. Why shouldn't you taste him when you eat? I think that prasadam is a very important thing. Krishna is God, so he's absolute. His name is form, prasadam, it's all him. They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, so if you can get to a man's spirit soul by eating, and it works, why not do it? You know? And Mukunda mentioned that Vedic literatures reveal that prasadam conveys spiritual realization just as chanting does. So you make spiritual advancement just by eating/honoring it. And George commented, I'd say from my experience that it definitely works. I've always enjoyed prasadam much more when I'm at the temple. So he recognized, you know, it's not just good cooking, but the spiritually infused that is there. Or when I'm actually sitting with Prabhupada and then somebody brings it to me so he can, you know, recognize this is not ordinary. Sometimes you can sit there with prasadam and find that 2 or 3 hours have gone by and you don't even know it. Prasadam would really help me a lot because you have to realize, now I'm tasting Krishna. Your consciousness suddenly of another aspect, you're conscious of another aspect of God. So, and then Mukunda mentioned about this time, and it was when we had moved into Lenin's place that you and George met Prabhupada together at Lenin's home. And George said, yes, but when I met him at first, I underestimated him. And this is really amazing, this little thing. When I first met him, I underestimated him. I didn't realize it then, but I see now that because of him, the mantra has spread so far. At this point, it was in the last 16 years, more than it had in the last 5 centuries. That's pretty amazing because he's getting older and he was getting older and older and he was writing these books all the time. I realized later he was much more incredible than what you could see on the surface. So Mukunda asked him, I mean, that's a beautiful realization. Mukunda asked, well, what about him stands out the most to you in your mind? And George responded, the thing that always stays is his saying, I'm a servant of the servant of the servant. I like that. A lot of people say, I'm it, I'm the divine incarnation. I'm here, let me hip you. You know what I mean? But Prabhupada was never like that. I like Prabhupada's humbleness. I always liked his humility and his simplicity. The servant of the servant of the servant is really where it's at, you know. None of us are God, just his servants. He just made me feel so comfortable. I always felt very relaxed with him, and I felt more like I was his friend. And he was a good friend, even though he was 79 years old, working practically all through the night, day after day, with very little sleep. He didn't come across to me as though he was highly educated, intellectual thing. It was more his childlike simplicity. It was great. It was fantastic. And this is something that people around the spectrum in the world, even back to the Haight-Ashbury days, that these musicians at that time, when Prabhupada heard the mantra rock decks, they picked up on that about him. And thus they were willing to help us, you know. Even though he was, so George continued, was like, even though he was a great Sanskrit scholar, he was a saint, I appreciated the fact that he never made me feel uncomfortable. He always went out of his way to make me feel comfortable. And I always thought of him as a really lovely friend. And now he's still a really lovely friend. And this is post-departure. You know? And then Mukunda commented, one of his books, Prabhupada said, you're sincere, he's speaking to George, one of your sincere service was better than some people who delve more deeply into Krishna consciousness, but couldn't maintain the level of commitment. So how did you feel about this? And George said, very wonderful, really. I mean, it really gives me hope. Because as they say, even one moment in the company of a divine person, Krishna's pure devotee, can help a tremendous amount. And if I didn't get feedback from Prabhupada on my songs about Krishna and the philosophy, I would get it from the devotees, and that was all the encouragement I needed. You know, it just seemed that anything spiritual I tried, either through the songs or helping with the publishing of the books or whatever, just pleased him. That song I wrote, Living in the Material World, as I wrote in I, Me, Mine, was influenced by Srila Prabhupada. He's the one who explained to me how we're not these physical bodies. We just happen to be in them. There was this thing about Prabhupada, you see. He didn't talk about loving Krishna and getting out of this place, but he was the perfect example. He talked about always chanting, and he was always chanting. I think that in itself was perhaps the most encouraging thing for me. It just was enough to make me try harder to be a little bit better. He was a perfect example of everything he preached. It was a long conversation. I'll end it quickly, but Mukunda said, did you know that complete sets of Srila Prabhupada's books are now in all major colleges and universities in the world, including Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Oxford, and Cambridge, and the Sorbonne? And George replied, they should be. His contribution has obviously been enormous from the literary point of view because he brought the Supreme Person Krishna into focus. A lot of scholars and writers know about the Bhagavad Gita, but only on an intellectual level. Even when they write, Krishna said, they don't do it with bhakti or the love that's required. That's the secret, you know. Krishna is actually a person who is the Lord and who will appear there in the book, or there is that love, or there is that bhakti. But these big so-called Vedic scholars, they don't love Krishna. They can't even understand him and give him to us. Prabhupada was different. He could do that, and he did. So anyway, I just felt like sharing a little bit about, sometimes people I want to talk about experience with the Beatles, but what about the experiences of the Beatles, and who was the quintessal Beatle? For us was George, you know, and their experience with Srila Prabhupada. One other quick thing. Mukunda mentioned when you were in Vrindavan, India, where Lord Krishna appeared, and you saw thousands of people chanting Hare Krishna, did it strengthen your faith in the idea of chanting, to see a whole city chanting Hare Krishna? George replied, yes. It fortifies you. It definitely helps. It's fantastic to be in a place where the whole town is doing it. And I also had the idea they were, locked into the idea. They were amazed to see this white person chanting on beads. Of course, it didn't help. It certainly helped that that person happened to be George Harrison. But he said Vrindavan is one of the most holiest cities in India. Everyone everywhere chants Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
And he said, it was my most fantastic experience. Anyway, as Srila Prabhupada would say, Shriman George Harrison Prabhu Ki Jai. One other quick thing, like they had a little talk about the state of affairs in the world, which just coincide with the hell we're going through today in the world. And Mukunda asked, do you think there's any hope? I mean, do people sometimes, is there any hope? And George answered, yes, one by one, everybody's got to escape Maya. Everybody has to burn out his karma and escape reincarnation and all that. Stop thinking if it's Britain or British or Russia or West, whatever. It doesn't work. The best thing you can give is God consciousness. Manifest your own divinity first. The truth is there. It's right within all of us. Understand where you are, what you are. People would just wake up to what's real. There wouldn't be any more misery in the world. And I guess chanting is a pretty good place to start. Mukunda goes, thanks, George. And George goes, all right, Hare Krishna. But I did just want to mention that in reality, we were never in awe and reverence. We were not looking at, wow, we just met the Beatles. We were just thinking, here's these spirit souls, and they have a very unique opportunity to spread Krishna consciousness. Let's hope we can give it to them in such a way they'll be inspired to do so. And that's what happened. We didn't bug them. Actually, there was that experience in Montreal before we'd even left. There was this famous, it was called the Bed-In. So at a hotel in Montreal, before we had left, John and Yoko, his wife, stayed in bed all day, and people could come, so that obviously the devotees would come. And there's a great picture of them there. You can see so many devotees. And one devotee, Suduta, who was kind of the leader at that time, he was kind of pushy. And John referred to him as the pusher. So then it was the little bed-in thing was about to be over. And then Suduta makes a big push to get some money out of John. And you could see it just wasn't the way to go. So then John said, he's there in bed with Yoko. He didn't have his wallet. There was no credit cards at that time. He goes, here, take my guitar. And Hamsaduta was such a fool. He goes, no, I want money. So he didn't get it, We never asked for anything. We were giving them Prabhupada and Krishna. And look what came of it, So this is really where things, just give Krishna, give Krishna, give Krishna. And Krishna will provide the inspiration in the heart of that person to respond. Yeah, Rukmini?
I think you mentioned once before that the first time you all went to his house, you started moving the furniture.
Yeah. Yeah, Shyam Sundar meets George on, maybe it was Monday or Tuesday, but by Friday we're going to his private residence, a few of us. And, you might be intimidated, you're going to George Harrison's house, but we knew that house wasn't his. We knew it belonged to Krishna. And Krishna's sending him to that house for a purpose, to give Krishna consciousness. And we were going to have a kirtan, so we just without even asking. We're moving all the furniture out of the way, you know. I mean, how many would go to, you go to somebody's house and move all the, only devotees would do that because we understand what's going on, you know. And it was after that meeting, we had prasadam cooked there. Patty's, his wife at the time, I remember she made cucumber raita. And after dinner, after prasadam, we had another kirtan joint. So let's go outside. It was a beautiful evening outside. We chatted. And on the way back in is when George says, we got to make a record. We didn't even have to ask. Didn't even come from us. It came from the Lord within the heart, because he was being given Krishna. So I'm just mentioning this because we've got a lot of opportunity here in Columbus. We've got a big project coming up, and we're going to need a lot of help. But we don't have to push people. We just have to inspire them, show them what we're doing, and invite them to be part of it. They'll be glad to join. They'll be glad to give. So Arti's going on. We'll get out of the way. Vrindavan Priya's here. Maybe she can chant.
Vrindavan Priya? Sure. Hare. All Malati Prabhu ki. George Harrison ki. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Prabhupada say Shriman George. Shriman George.
Shriman George Harrison Prabhu ki.
Like when we'd have kirtan at the Pacific Ocean.
Devotees, we can take all these mats, put them away. Thank you very much.
I try to put this picture on the TV.
Hold on, my leg is now.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. That's Hare Krishna, Swami, Mukunda, myself. His name was Gopal. Shikar. Shamsundar, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, some of us are dead and gone now.
Starting, so you can all face that.
How are you? Now you know who is George Harrison. Yeah.